When you own a stretch of land big enough that it takes 10 minutes to drive from the front gate to your porch, you start to take certain things for granted, like the fact that your own driveway is, well, yours. I'd lived on my 200-acre ranch for over 15 years, inherited from my grandfather who'd carved it out of what was once nothing but mesquite scrub and dry creek beds. My main entrance was a long gravel road that cut directly through a strip of land he'd also owned. One that just happened to sit between the highway and a brand new subdivision built by one of those overeager developers who think nature is just an obstacle to be paved over. When that subdivision started popping up 3 years ago, I didn't think much of it. I figured the HOA would have enough trouble keeping up with their fake lakes and overpriced amenities without bothering a guy like me. I was wrong. At first, it was small stuff, a few cars mistakenly turning into my drive thinking it was some scenic back route into their community, a couple of HOA board members stopping by to ask if I'd consider selling the strip of land that connected my gate to the highway so they could improve traffic flow. I told them no, politely the first time, firmly the second, and then with enough bite the third time that they didn't come back for a while. But then last spring, I came back from a week-long cattle auction to find a brand-new 6-foot-high black iron fence stretched across my entire driveway entrance. It was padlocked, had a shiny HOA emblem bolted right in the center, and came complete with a smug little laminated sign that read, "Private HOA property, no trespassing." For a solid minute, I just sat in my truck, staring at it like maybe, if I blinked enough times, it would vanish. Then I realized exactly what had happened. The HOA had decided, in their infinite arrogance, that because their subdivision had now wrapped around both sides of my driveway strip, they could claim it as common area. I got out, checked the property markers, still exactly where they'd been for decades, and took photos of everything, including the cement footings they'd poured directly onto my land. Then I tried calling the HOA number posted on their website. No answer. I tried the president, a guy named Frank who looked like a human version of a crowbar, long, skinny, and perpetually scowling. He answered, and when I explained that they'd blocked me from entering my own ranch, he said, in the smuggest tone I've ever heard, "Well, technically that strip is an easement, and the board voted to restrict access for safety reasons. If you need to get in, you can fill out a request form and we'll see about issuing you a gate code." I think I actually laughed out loud. An easement? On my land? There was no recorded easement in the deed. I knew that because I double-checked when they first started sniffing around. And the idea that I'd need to request permission to drive onto property I'd owned since before their HOA even existed was absurd. I told him to take the fence down within 24 hours or I'd start removing it myself. He said, "Go ahead. But that would be destruction of HOA property and we'll have you arrested." That was the moment I decided this wasn't going to be solved with polite phone calls. I drove around to my back entrance, a rough trail through the north pasture that was barely wide enough for a truck, and spent the rest of the evening pulling every land survey, title record, and plat map I had into a folder. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Linda, who's about as gentle as a bulldozer when it comes to property disputes. She laughed harder than I had when I told her about the gate, then said, "Oh, they're going to regret this. Don't touch the fence yet. We're going to make them pay to keep it there." That's when she explained the beauty of something called an access toll agreement. Since their fence was now blocking the only convenient route for half their residents to get from the subdivision to the highway, because, yes, they'd been quietly using my strip as a shortcut without ever asking, we could legally require them to enter into a license agreement if they wanted to cross it at all. And if they refused, well, we'd simply leave the fence in place, force them to use the long way around, and let their property values plummet. It was the first time in this whole mess that I started to grin. I wasn't just going to win. I was going to make the HOA cut me a check every single month for the privilege of driving over what had always been mine. And they were going to hate every second of it. By the next morning, Linda already had a draft proposal written up that would have made any corporate lawyer blush. pages of legal language establishing that, should the wish to use any part of my land for ingress or egress to their subdivision, they would be required to pay a per-vehicle toll and a monthly base fee for the license, plus penalties for any unauthorized crossings. She wasn't bluffing when she said we were going to make them pay. The rates she listed would have made a big city toll bridge look like a charity drive-through. But before we sent it, she wanted more leverage, which meant I needed proof that HOAS residents had been driving through my entrance regularly, even though it wasn't theirs to use. That part was easy. I'd already installed a trail cam on a post near the gate after the first couple of mistaken turn-ins, and when I pulled the SD card, it was like striking gold. Dozens of cars, golf carts, even a moving truck had been captured cruising in and out of my driveway strip every single day for months, some of them waving like they owned the place. Linda smiled when she saw the footage and said, "Perfect. Now we can prove they've been trespassing without an agreement." That afternoon we sent the HOAS board a formal letter, not an email, a hand-delivered packet sent by courier so there'd be no claim they never got it. The letter stated that, as of that day, the strip of land from the highway to my ranch entrance was private property, that all access was revoked except under a paid licensing agreement, and that any continued use would incur daily trespass fees. We included a copy of the toll agreement, which was generous in that it offered them the ability to keep using the road. If they paid me $1,500 per month plus $5 per vehicle per day, and we gave them exactly 10 days to sign. Predictably, it didn't go over well. The very next day, Frank called me, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're out of your mind if you think the HOA is going to pay you to use what's essentially a public road." I let him talk himself into a corner before calmly saying, "Then you'll have to stop using it." There was a long silence before he tried another angle. "You know, this could get ugly for you. You're surrounded by our community now. It wouldn't be hard for the board to make life difficult." I told him to feel free to try, hung up, and immediately called Linda to tell her to proceed with filing an official notice of restricted access with the county clerk, something that would show up on any title search for the HOAS common areas, and make their insurance company very nervous. While we were at it, we filed a trespass warning with the sheriff's department, attaching the trail cam footage. That's when things started to get interesting. By the end of the week, deputies had been out twice, warning HOA residents that the shortcut they'd been using was no longer legal to cross. Some of them were furious, swearing they'd always been told it was a public access road. Others just shrugged and started taking the long route, which added about 12 minutes to their commute. But Frank wasn't backing down. On the 8th day, I drove past the front entrance to check on the fence and saw something that made me laugh. The HOA had installed their own keypad gate just past mine, as if to double down on their claim that it was theirs. Unfortunately for them, the keypad was mounted to a post on my side of the property line, meaning they'd just added more unauthorized structures to my land. I took pictures, sent them to Linda, and 2 hours later she'd sent a revised agreement. Same toll rates, plus an additional $500 per month, equipment encroachment fee. Day 10 came and went without a signature from the HOA. Day 11, I locked the fence myself, replaced their cheap padlock with one of my own, and posted 2 large signs. Private property nitrogen monoxide entry without license. That's when the real chaos began. Every morning, like clockwork, I'd sit on my porch with coffee and watch as HOA residents drove up to the fence, punched their code into the keypad, which still controlled nothing, and then sat there fuming when they realized the actual gate was locked tight. Some honked. Some yelled. One guy even tried to climb it, which ended with him falling into the gravel and limping back to his SUV. Frank started leaving me voicemails, at first demanding I open it until the dispute is resolved, then threatening lawsuits, then begging me to be reasonable because residents were complaining. But I wasn't in the mood for reasonable. By week 3, traffic was snarled every morning along their subdivision's main road because the alternate route was just a single-lane bridge with a terrible sightline, and they were starting to have fender benders. That's when Linda called and said the magic words, "They're ready to talk." I met Frank and two other board members at the county courthouse conference room, with Linda sitting next to me like a smiling shark. They slid a watered-down version of my agreement across the table, a lower monthly fee, no per-vehicle tolls, and a shorter contract term. I didn't even glance at it. I pushed it back and said, "No changes. You pay the rate I set for the term I set, or the fence stays locked forever." There was a lot of whispering on their side, but in the end, they knew they had no legal leg to stand on. When they finally signed, Linda made sure the ink was dry before I handed over a new gate key. The first monthly check cleared 2 days later. I deposited it with a smile, knowing this was just the beginning, because nothing in the agreement said I couldn't raise the toll later if they annoyed me again, and I had a feeling they would. For the first couple of months after the ink dried on our agreement, the HOA board was almost eerily polite, sending their checks on time and avoiding any confrontations at the gate, but I knew that was just the calm before the storm. People like Frank and his crew didn't just accept defeat, they plotted ways to claw back control, and sure enough, it started with small, passive-aggressive moves designed to test my boundaries. First it was accidentally sending the monthly payment 2 or 3 days late, followed by claims that the mail was slow or the treasurer was out of town. Then it was residents speeding through the gate, almost daring me to complain, as if they thought I wouldn't notice the toll count ticking up. I kept meticulous logs, thanks to a motion-activated camera that captured every plate number, and I began emailing the HOA detailed invoices at the end of each month, itemized to the last car. The first time they saw a bill with over $1,200 in, vehicle tolls on top of the $1,500 base fee, they called Linda in a panic, insisting it had to be a mistake. She calmly pointed out that their signed agreement spelled it all out, and that if they wanted to avoid per-vehicle charges, they'd have to limit their usage. That didn't sit well, and within a week they tried their first real stunt, sending a crew in the dead of night to cut through the backfield, bulldozing a crude dirt path around my fence. Unfortunately for them, they'd miscalculated the property lines. The entire shortcut was still on my land, and my game cams caught. The whole operation in crisp 108 OP, right down to the HOA logo on the workers' safety vests. The next morning, I called the sheriff's department and filed a criminal damage report, then sent a $5,000 land restoration bill to the citing our agreement's clause on damages. Frank blew up my phone, threatening that this was war and accusing me of profiting off the community, to which I simply replied, "You're the ones who fenced off my entrance. Actions have consequences." They didn't pay the restoration bill, so Linda escalated by filing a lien on their common area property, the clubhouse, pool, tennis courts, effectively putting their HOA dues income at risk until they settled. That's when the resident pressure turned inward. I started hearing through local gossip that half the neighborhood was furious at the board for dragging this out and costing them money, especially after I mailed every homeowner a copy of the original survey map showing that the so-called public road was entirely mine. The board tried to rally sympathy by painting me as some kind of greedy recluse, but when the residents realized I'd been here long before the HOA existed, and that it was their board's fence stunt that caused this mess, the narrative began to shift. Some even started honking and waving when they passed through the gate, as if to say, "We're not all mad at you." But Frank wasn't finished. His next move was to petition the county to declare the road a public easement, which would have voided my ability to charge tolls. That's where his arrogance tripped him up. The county planning office not only denied his request, but they also notified him that the HOA had been out of compliance with their subdivision access plan for years, meaning they were technically in violation of their development permits. Linda and I couldn't have asked for better leverage. I attended the next HOA board meeting, uninvited but holding a stack of invoices and photos, and waited until resident complaints boiled over before calmly laying out their options. Keep paying as agreed, or face lawsuits, liens, and a possible county order to build a brand new access road entirely on their own property, a project that would cost them well into 6 figures. The room went dead silent except for the sound of someone muttering, "We're screwed," under their breath. By the end of the meeting, the board had not only agreed to continue payments, but they also asked me, if I'd be willing to negotiate a lower per-vehicle fee in exchange for a longer contract term. I told them I'd think about it, but in truth, I had no intention of lowering a dime. Every month they paid me was a reminder that they'd tried to bully the wrong landowner. And judging by Frank's clenched jaw as he handed me that month's check, he knew it too. By the time fall rolled around, the HOA had been paying me like clockwork for nearly 6 months, and while most of the board had accepted this as their new reality, Frank clearly hadn't given up on trying to wriggle out of it. I could see it in his eyes every time he had to physically hand me a check. The man looked like he'd swallowed a lemon whole, and I knew he was biding his time for some kind of masterstroke. That stroke came in early October when I woke up one morning to find the gate completely missing, gone, posts and all, like it had been surgically removed. At first I thought maybe some drunk driver had plowed through in the night, but there were no tire marks, no debris, nothing. Just clean-cut post holes and a conspicuously open road into the subdivision. I didn't need to be Sherlock Holmes to figure out who was behind it, especially since one of my motion-activated cameras had caught the whole thing. 3 men in hoodies working under the glare of truck headlights, removing the gate piece by piece and loading it into the back of a flatbed that I recognized as belonging to one of the HOA's landscaping contractors. They clearly thought they were clever, but they made 2 huge mistakes. 1, they did it on my land, and 2, they forgot that the removal of the gate didn't change the fact that the road itself was still mine. By mid-morning, I was at the sheriff's office with the footage, filing a theft and trespassing report, and by lunchtime, deputies were knocking on Frank's door. He tried to play dumb, claiming he had no knowledge of the incident, but the deputies had already confirmed that the truck in the video was rented by the HOA under his signature. The next day, I got a call from Linda saying the lawyer was in full damage control mode, offering to replace the gate if I would agree to drop the criminal complaint. I told her to tell them it wasn't just about replacing the gate. They'd tampered with my property, disrupted a legally binding agreement, and stolen something worth over $7,000. That meant restitution, damages, and per our contract, penalty fee of $250 per vehicle for every day the gate was down. By the time they put a new gate back up a week later, they owed me over $8,000 just in penalties on top of replacing the stolen gate. Frank was livid, but the residents were starting to turn on him hard. Word spread fast that his little stunt had backfired spectacularly, and several neighbors even thanked me for holding the board accountable. That's when Frank made his final, desperate move, one so reckless it practically gift-wrapped me the legal win of the century. Late one night, he personally drove a backhoe up to the fence line and started tearing down a section of it, presumably to create a public entrance the HOA could use without going through my gate. Unfortunately for him, he didn't get very far before my cameras, my dogs, and the sheriff's department all kicked into action at once. By the time deputies arrived, Frank was still in the backhoe, mid-swing, and there was no denying what he was doing. They arrested him on the spot for destruction of property, trespassing, and violation of a court-recognized contract. The county prosecutor didn't mess around. The evidence was too clean, the footage too damning. Frank was staring down fines, probation, and a permanent criminal record, and with him out of the picture, the rest of the board crumbled. Within 2 weeks, the HOA voted in a new president, a soft-spoken woman named Teresa, who called me directly to apologize for everything and promised the board would not only honor the agreement, but also stop trying to find loopholes. I almost felt bad for her inheriting the mess Frank had created, but I knew this was the clean break they needed. We amended the agreement to lock in a 10-year term, with automatic renewals and a clause stating that any interference with the gate or road would triple the monthly payment for the remainder of the contract. Teresa signed it without hesitation, clearly eager to put the whole ordeal behind them. For me, it was more than just a win. It was a reminder that standing your ground, armed with the law, patience, and a few strategically placed cameras can turn a bully's power play into a self-inflicted disaster. And every time I hear the faint ding of my toll counter clicking over as another HOA car drives through, I can't help but smile at the thought that they're literally paying for the privilege of crossing the land they once thought they could take from me. By the time spring rolled into summer, the toll system had gone from being a sore point for the HOA to a grudgingly accepted reality, and for me it had evolved into one of the most consistent and satisfying forms of passive income I'd ever set up. The gate operated smoothly, the solar-powered toll display updated itself daily, and my bank account reflected every single vehicle that passed through, down to the landscaping trucks, pool maintenance vans, and even the pizza delivery guy who had learned to add the toll cost to the homeowner's bills. It was poetic. They had tried to fence me out of my own land, but now the very fence line and road they'd underestimated had become my personal ATM. What made it sweeter was that the residents themselves, stripped of the toxic leadership of Frank, started dealing with me directly for side arrangements, leasing parts of my pasture for horse grazing, renting barn space for RV storage, or negotiating seasonal access for large events. I always charged fairly, but I never forgot the lesson this HOA had taught me, and I made sure every agreement was written, notarized, and bound by airtight terms that put me in control. Carla, my lawyer, still called it turning revenge into an annuity, and every time she said it, I grinned. Even the new HOA president, Teresa, privately admitted that my system was more reliable than the chaotic mess Frank had created. She paid on time, and she kept her word to avoid trouble. But while the arrangement was civil now, I kept my security sharp, upgrading cameras, reinforcing the gate hinges, and running quarterly audits of the toll software to make sure no one was sneaking through unpaid. The holiday multiplier fee I'd introduced turned Memorial Day weekend into a small gold mine, and residents who once rolled their eyes at the toll now planned around it, booking carpools or arranging deliveries during off-peak hours to save money. The irony was that the road, which had once been a flashpoint for hostility, was now a place where I waved at passing neighbors, sometimes even stopping for small talk while the toll reader did its job. And Frank? He'd been barred from HOA leadership for 5 years as part of his probation, and after his failed attempt to challenge me in court, he moved away, his pride too dented to keep living in a community that had literally been paying me to cross his path. The first time I heard he'd left, I walked the boundary line where his fence had once tried to cut me off, and I realized I wasn't just guarding land anymore, I was guarding a principle. No one was ever going to decide for me how I used what was mine. Over time, the story of the guy who owns the road spread beyond our little area. Even nearby HOAs started quietly checking their deeds and easements to avoid ending up in the same situation. And for me, life settled into a steady rhythm. Coffee in the morning while the first tolls of the day rolled in, a quick check of the gate camera feeds, and evenings spent by the creek that marked the true, uncheckable border of my property. The road still carried traffic, but every set of wheels was a quiet reminder that I had turned their attempt to box me in into a lifetime victory. Some people build fences to keep others out. I built a gate that made them pay every single time they came in.